authorities represented, and then just give us a précis, Jenny, of the organisations that were here, just the key ones represented. Sorry.
Mids in my mouth. We had church groups that run aged care facilities, had not-for-profits with an interest in housing. We had government agencies, facts, housing, the Department of Premier and Cabinet, RDA from the mid-north coast, quite a few planners from different councils on the far north coast. We had people who are involved in container build, or like Tecton, container build. Real estate agent yesterday, John Briggs, the new one from Patch and Taylor. I'm trying to think of what other groups might have been here. That's probably very diverse group. The group that we could not reach were financiers. We had one acceptance from all the banks and building societies, but they then sent a late apology. So financiers were the group that was missing, if you like. But as far as every other group was concerned, they were well represented. Only a few reps and at the government level or RDA level from mid-north coast, but they will be very interested in what happens here, because there are plans for a one-day forum in April at Port Macquarie that will probably be different to here, but will lead on from here.
So it was more organisational based rather than inviting people of the community?
We had 2 reps from U3A. I had asked them to send as senior consumer reps, so they sent Richard Swinton, who you would know, and Anne Tuart, who I didn't know, but they were here for the whole 2 days and made a really good contribution. Other groups, pensioners and superannuants and other groups were invited, but didn't come.
And was it focused more? Was the focus on urban strategies or urban and rural?
Urban, rural, and coastal.
Excellent.
We'll get to that.
Excellent. That's
So we, prior to the workshop, we had met Elizabeth O'Brien from the university do some research, which was really just a desktop study, which gave us a very useful long list of issues, and from sort of every imaginable perspective around seniors living. And of course, the process that Jenny is governing has got a few headings, but the one bullet point is housing specifically, and so this was fairly focused on housing. And of course, the minute you look at housing, you say, well, where is it? And then that says, well, it's well located, or there's a transport issue, or there's health is too far away, and so you do get into peripheral issues in the conversation. And I think we managed that quite well in the process. So we had this to work with, and people had access to that and to those issues. We spent the morning breaking up into 3 sectors, 2 groups on users. So these are especially the community social work people and people with a strong empathy around what the issues are for the elderly. So looking at it sort of grassroots up, if you like. 2 groups on providers, which would be private sector kind of builders, but also other providers, community housing.
They have strong presence too.
That's right, and the housing department or housing.
Yeah, Department of Housing.
Department of Housing.
New South Wales.
Yeah.
And so 2 groups on providers, and then 2 groups.
Rodney Land, who's the head of the department, and he was here for the whole 2 days.
Fantastic.
And then 2 groups on authorities, which from local government and with the Premier's office.
Yep, DPC was here. Lisa Bray. Lisa, yeah, the new rep. Terrific.
Yeah, so it was a remarkable representation, sort of the full circle of representation. And we came out with a sort of a long list of issues, which I'm not going to take you through, because we then got into out of that, we sort of started putting an emphasis out and a grouping and so on at an afternoon session, and then this morning we
sharpened that session up further, had lots of discussion around prioritisation and such, and then that brought us to this position, which in essence had these key, we were very keen to get very definitive actions to come out of this, and you'll see how explicit we got with that. And if this is sort of notionally the user or the individual, that's what this is all about. This is a steering group connected to the working group, people in this room and people in future who are going to drive and deliver some of these things. We have these initiatives, and so there were three kind of advocacy initiatives, one to the Commonwealth or federal government, one to the state government, and one to local government. I'll go through the issues in a minute. And then we had one which was trying to endeavour to get a new build demonstration project or two on the ground, and to try and use that as to develop a model as to how to deliver this. And you may have to have a demonstration project to stop, to kick it off. And the model is really about getting integrated outcomes. There was overwhelming, almost repetitious sort of a sense that isolation is the big enemy, and that if we can, in the way forward, can find ways of mixing the elderly with the rest of, call it the normal population. That's the wrong way to say it, but you know what I mean. And so that also translated into, is there sort of a public-private sector approach to this? And community housing, we hear, and they were pretty keen on that, and actually have some models already happening in that space. And so can you get, if it's new development, can you get development where 60-70% may be private sector, but the rest is elderly and kind of community based? So it's getting integrated models, and then part of that, there's $1 billion being put up by the government in this space, and can we form a bid for that?
Just been announced, it's $1 billion for social and affordable housing. The guidelines aren't out yet, but it's just been announced. And we think it's probably part of poles and wires, but
So
it's not clear. State government, yes.
So you think this is social housing?
Social and affordable for vulnerable groups, and you could argue that, some older people as far as,
And so a little bit more of that to come, and then, so this kind of new build, but then aging in place, looking at people staying in their houses, and what are the barriers, and the research threw up actually some really interesting things about that, although it's quite possible physically for a lot of people, often like, a partner, a single person left behind in a house, one person in a house is empty, and technically it's quite possible to go in and either sort of subdivide the house or put a second dwelling on, or granny flat and so on. But actually the barriers are more the effort, the psychological thing, people at that age, too complicated, daunted by it, or maybe even family getting in the way. And so we call this dual occupancy facilitation. How can one break through some of those barriers? The design is easy. The construction is easy. We have people in the room who built these things, and they're building them currently. And so the physical part's actually quite easy. It's really the sort of the psychological and a little bit the funding part of things. But even the funding, if there's an asset there, you'd really imagine it'd be quite doable. You've got a house worth 300,000 or 400,000, to do 70,000 worth of work on it. Come on, And so I think it's almost like a psychological thing. So more of that I'll explain. And then we had quite a big one around communication, and that many of the elderly just really don't know the options out there for them, and to make that visible for them, and that's sort of quite linked with this. So you'll see that link. And then later in the day we came up with probably an important one, not so heavyweight to deliver, but an important one around the private development sector, and to inform them great awareness of this growing market, and community, and to try and amp up their sort of preparedness to start servicing this sector better. Because the private sector seems to be just repeating itself, from what I'm hearing and what I've anecdotally been seeing over the years, even here. And also maybe alerting them to some of these possibilities they could be linked back to this. So those took us then, this first one about advocacy. And so this is about key people in the room going to government and having a very crystallized package that they want to present to government, some very distilled propositions to government to deal with certain things. And so we had some very good people in this conversation, and just starting with the Commonwealth. The first thing was just to get realistic about who to attack there. It's very political, it's very personal, and so we really got right down to names and to and how to go about that, and that sort of really excited me, because that meant the talking will sort of stop and the action can start, because people are focusing right down to Lucy Turnbull and can one indoctrinate her into pillow talk and put words in her mouth and for her to influence. And so and there was further down talk about who drives and delivers which entities, and so there's quite a lot of sort of organizational talk about this, but the purpose really was a lot more around higher profile for this issue, and to connect to these issues at Commonwealth level where there's relationships. We got stuff around like your super and how some people get penalized around actually being reticent to sell their houses, and relationships there, which I don't understand, but came through in the fine print, and so it's that really sort of higher level few issues there to argue for. And you've got to, you just got to start somewhere. It may take years. At state level, it was, on the legislative direction, again, very specific around which people. And so the first was kind of getting into that, but the regional plans, and apparently you've got a cycle coming up now, and you've got an opportunity to influence those plans, and that you use this group to try and pull that together to get that.
Travis, what does MACA stand for?
Minister on the Aging, Ministry of Aging. No, something about Ministerial something Council on the Aged.
So
Ministers Advisory Council on Aging.
The ministry as in church-like group?
No. Ministers as in state minister.
So there's actually a whole other sheet that happened the day before, and Susanna, which is linked to this, which goes into some of the specific sort of advocacy points that they wanted to get through. But the big thing at state level was two things. One was that people felt that there's a sort of a vacuum in the space in terms of their regional planning, but also that there's inconsistency through the region, and so that's kind of two-way, and the inconsistency is around things like different local authorities requiring different degrees of, say, universal design, for instance, and then some of them, the more progressive ones have a higher standard, but then the market punishes them by going to the least progressive one. And if you can get some consistency, it becomes more of a level playing field, and the market isn't just avoiding dealing with things which are really truly important for the elderly. And we think it's top down, bottom up, because the other bottom one here is local government, and that is sort of seeing where those inconsistencies are and starting just early on to try and iron them out just with local agreement. because this may take years to get to some sort of law change. And so there was a feeling that it's sort of, that you've got to go top down, bottom up. And also with the local authorities, in addition to kind of who has a go, was sort of the series of barriers that we think in development terms. So some of these things have just got to do with general affordability and general sort of building issues, of which within that sector the elderly, obviously fit, and because the margins are so tight, those things that's actually a very important conversation. So this is sort of at the bureaucratic level. One little one that popped up, because you asked Dennis a question earlier, coastal sort of mid, which we mean inland, really, like Lismore, and then rural, and the rural settlements. And what we found is in the rural settlements, we're hearing that there's great difficulty getting a second dwelling, and one can understand that if it's being abused, but apparently there's quite a lot of tension out there with people aging, and then they get to a point where they've just got to sort of go somewhere, and so this is giving them that trying to alleviate that issue there.
One of the things that I was interested in, Curtis, was in that rural space, and I'm talking about our LGA, is that we have a lot of people who live out of town on MOs, in communities, and whatever, and they have different needs. I think a lot of them have different needs in what they think their ageing strategy is. I mean, they're not likely to go into the Karunas of the world, and we need to be thinking, do we put these types of developments in the country, at the Channel, or or whatever it might be. So there's that was where I was coming to with rural.
Yes.
Was that did that get discussed?
So
about
what came up?
I hesitate to say the alternate people, but that's basically what I'm saying.
Well, in the rural, there were sort of three factors which came, because we did ask. We actually had a session around what are the geographic differences, and so we sort of highlighted what the differences are. But in the rural, there were three things that popped up, four things. First one was they tend to be hardier people, and so they're not asking for the Rolls Royce. They're out there already because they're not sort of softened up around town, living and everything on a plate. And so just be aware of that. Don't patronize them in that sense. Second one was there will be transport issues for a lot of them, and especially when connected with health. And two conversations came out of that. One is, don't put your money on public transport, because Brent was saying 90% of your money goes to school buses, and these places are so small that you'll probably for a long time find it difficult to justify meaningful public transport. And so what are the alternative transport plans, and are there alternative ways of looking at that? Maybe a sort of a people mover on demand, or some non-government approach, or some sort of facilitation. And so the question was asked around that, and then in terms of health, there was quite a good conversation around that the models of delivering health are changing a lot, and there's and I think one gentleman, his name will come to me, but he was Manfred, I think it was, and he was saying how
a planner from Byron, I think.
Could be. He was saying how 5 years ago you couldn't even have this conversation, but now the health delivery patterns are changing, and that and there's a greater awareness of reaching out and not having constant travel, and so and maybe with also with the internet and some of those patterns. So there might be a future which is a bit more benign to people in rural places, not being close to the doctor.
Those barriers may not be quite as high.
They might be quite, and then if that occurs, then you may be more prone to allowing more happen there, because you know that you're not setting people into a destitute sort of eventual situation. So, but there was feelings that even when we get to the demonstration project, that it's not just about creating some apartments next to the hospital, which by the way would be a 5-star outcome. You know, that'd be brilliant to get that. If it had a 40% or at least, or 30 or 40% elderly in it, then we're achieving some serious goals. But so that could be one outcome, but another outcome may be 10 houses in Dunoon or somewhere on this other model, which is carefully thought through in a sort of fine-grained way. And so we did sort of suggest that these are looked at in those ways. So this is really new housing, and the integrated model, which was this sort of long list here, but just in summary to say, it's about really that really desirable thing of how can you combine private sector initiative and community housing in a way which both benefit. Now, the private sector can benefit, and there are many projects where they benefit from that relationship because they get guarantee of sales. A proportion of the project is guaranteed via the community housing, depending on how the funding works. That helps them with their leverage with banks and finance and such. So they really like that. And if they're clever, they'll design in a way which integrates, and it's quite good because they're forced to think about how to design that they don't get sort of a negative out of that relationship in their marketing. Well, that's quite good because it means they've got to make things look similar. They've got to actually, and that's actually good for the dignity of the people, the poorer people or people with less money, because it's a sort of a self-consciousness on the private sector side, which is actually quite good from the other side because it just makes things more normal and cohesive, and they just and therefore blending poorer and wealthier people in the same complex. And it certainly is, we think, will be one of the levers if we did go for the bid to actually go in strongly about that this is about trying to integrate and create normal society again because of the isolation issue.
Yeah. One of the other significant groups in our community is the gay and lesbian group, which is also ageing. And they've got particular concerns and needs.
We had a MACA representative who's also representing the gay and lesbian community here today, so both days. So he talked
So there was a discussion.
Yes, and so in a way, those things have been done before in one way or another, and you actually have the community guy was saying he's currently got something going with Lismore on council land.
John McKenna.
Yeah.
All right, yes, that's true. Yes.
And so he was saying, there's already a basis to build on.
Yes.
In Galabar, where is it?
It's up on the Simeone Drive land.
Oh, the one that was to be rekindling the spirit,
yes.
of course.
Yes.
Yes, so very close to here.
And there's a very strong interest from the Northern Rivers Social Development Council to work in that space with us as well into the future.
We're at our board meeting at the moment.
Yes.
We're looking at housing.
We're meeting with Jennifer Park early next week, I think.
There was a feeling amongst some councillors, particularly council staff here, with Paula, look, we can't wait for the private industry to do a demonstration model. Let's just do it. And I think this model, it might be too far advanced, or it might not qualify for the application. Who knows? But we've just got to show people what's available.
But it is, if you're saying we're already active in this space, that'll count towards your credibility in that
We
bid.
can do it. Yeah.
The bid, I think, was a nice. It actually conversation started with a bid, but then we said, hang on, that'll be nice, but we should actually be thinking more systemic, and we should be thinking about how do you set this in motion. And if you get money from the bid, hallelujah. But
And also regionally, just stop thinking, stop thinking about each LGA and about how best we can deliver it for the region.
And I think, this, just reflecting on it, this model may actually come out with some, dare I
I say it, some sort of arm's length organisation which is a sort of slightly a delivery arm. You don't want to make it too heavyweight, but they're almost more development managers than project managers. Because you want to set up protocols, you want to give some assurances so that those projects can happen again. And if new ones come in, you're working within an established routine, an established set of protocols. Auckland's council, like many councils, is now just getting very strong on a development agency because they've now delivered some quite good outcomes. But there are many, Australia is in fact far ahead of New Zealand in that respect, but there are models to draw from, and we know there's research to be done, but I think this is, can be quite exciting. And the power can be that if it is spread over more entities, that you can make it more regional. I think that's part of it.
I've got another meeting I'm chairing now, but yeah, keep going. And you don't need me for anything else. You can talk about what the next steps are for us. Yeah, all right.
You know the end.
I do know.
Thank you. And so this was that one, and then the dual occupancy, which was this, and we had 2 sessions on the dual occupancy. We started off by saying aging in place doesn't need to be dual occupancy. It can just be somebody elderly taking on a student at rent in their room, in their house. But if there are barriers to that, sometimes psychological barriers, and let's say it's an older lady and her children are saying, no, you're not going to do that. We don't know who's going to be in your house and so on. So what are the mechanisms to get more assurances and safety? It's kind of and then the next step is, can one assist them just to get some adjustments made to their house to make it more tenable? So some universal design things, some of these things are available but they don't know, and so is there just some facilitation there? And that can give them 5 years of extended life in their house. But where there's opportunity, and you've just got increasing opportunity for dual occupancy, i.e. a granny flat, and the design is easy, and the planning is sort of allowing it in most places. It seems to be more a psychological barrier and a confidence barrier of somebody elderly taking this complex thing on. For me it's a nightmare when we do work, and and so there was quite a lot of work around sort of a project manager, for want of a better word, and who can help facilitate that. And there was a feeling that council are actually best positioned. Now there might have to be funding from elsewhere, but that it's sort of roomed in housed in council because of the nature of council, and that they can get sort of preferred list of suppliers and people. They can there can be little project management people sort of taking trouble out of it, and that there are protocols established for that. So that was
like just taking a package to different places.
Yes, and then
There's a home modification service too. We could fit to that very easily.
That's a very good point.
Because they actually go into people's homes.
And that is from within council?
No,
it's state
state service.
Susanna, can you pick that up? We'll ask the question back. But home modification, yeah. That, and that's the other thing we said. Small group, under-resourced. We don't want to invent anything that's been done before. We want to pick up and align. That's a brilliant point. And the first thing actually before the project management was information and so on, and I'll just touch on that in a minute, because there was another group doing specifically that. So that communications work patches into here. It's a bit wider than this, but it does deal directly to dual occupancy. And they went through, in fine grain who and so on, and we actually got individuals attached to each of these projects to help with the follow-up, because Jenny and Greg, just weren't managed, and then this whole thing like a beehive collapses, and so we've actually got people committed to picking up probably in the new year. And then
And then the other thing was communications, and this one was communications to users, so the elderly. So some of it patching in here, and that was the actual the little. And we asked them to kind of just outline what are the things that they would be communicating, and they thought there are three categories: sort of a low care, some more care, and then high care. There's sort of those categories of people that you want to communicate to. They could be of varying ages, because it's not always age related, and how they would really effectively be communicating to them what their options are.
And their decision making.
Because it's just the ignorance is often the enemy. And then that takes it through to how they would sort of play it through. And one of the first things in the research is just existing products or other examples. A huge amount of this has been done around the world, and so there'll be brilliant examples to leverage off, but you've got to customize it for your area. And also to link with other organizations in the advocacy space in your region who may be doing part of that, because if you can piggyback on what they're doing, there's scope.
Just in the communications thing, it seems like there's another barrier in terms of people actually understanding the whole financial system around aged care. It seems like it's a complete nightmare.
Yeah.
And people are
Absolutely.
avoiding it until the last minute.
And how do
Well,
you
it's too
get it?
late.
How do you get it down to the language for somebody in a particular kind of condition?
Because a lot of the
Or a
community-
family even.
Yeah.
Where there might be conflict with the family.
Indeed, and
And the communication is not just to the aged or the elderly, it's to the people retiring. They need to be thinking
Yeah.
about options, strategies, what's available, what are other options for me in 15
very
years
powerful
or whatever.
point. And people were picking up that often that communication is to the main advisor to the user. So is it the daughter-in-law,
Or is it
son?
solicitors who do wills and
Exactly.
and to provide
Exactly.
information there to say,
Exactly.
do we need to be looking at some other?
That's a very good
as
point.
well?
That's a very good point. And
Most people are starting to think about wills as they get a bit older
yeah.
and retiring.
Well, there was also some
Retirement soon.
really interesting stuff come through about communicating the real cost of building, and so what the maintenance costs are, and then what the penalties are for not doing it right in the first place, and that people just make choices. There's also some really simple things which get you a long way on universal design. Just simply putting things within reach of 1 meter high. Simple as that. So your windows, instead of being here. Now it doesn't cost you to drop them 300 mil, but it means from, especially an elderly, frail person reaching a window latch here versus here could mean you can't, you just can't deal with it. And some of those things are really dead simple.
If he does beforehand, you need to do them.
Exactly, and so when you do a bathroom, just to put the bracing in where the handrail's going to come in 15 years time or 10 years time, and so you don't have to break the wall down to put the handrail
We're
in.
just doing that at the moment. I might just
Double check with the bracing.
talk about the bracing for the handrails. But we are we're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We're looking at accessible space getting in and out of bathrooms.
Absolutely.
We need to think about
But it needn't look like an accessible, like
No.
the disabled toilet here. It needn't look like that for 20 years when you.
No.
But it could just flip. So that was important. And then we had this communications to private sector, and I think I touched on that. The thing that a lot of the private sector aren't realizing there's a growing market there, and they're not getting their heads around actually servicing that market. And we think that may deliver some results. I'm optimistic about that because I know how dumb the private sector is. It's often like I've got 20 years experience, but it's 1 year times 20. And not a lot of people go back and do the hard work of researching the reality quality today and the finer grain. And this can help those people, because often it's small developers and they don't have the resources for the big intelligence. So one other thing was that this was sort of a particularly disturbing diagram in that it looks like it needs some psychology, sort of some therapy analysis. But what it does do is sort of the ecology of seniors related entities and institutions. And it actually became, it's just a backdrop diagram, but it actually became really useful in the conversation around most of these areas in terms of who are the players, where are they. And so if your point that you just made around housing, helping people with house renovations, if we pick that up here, then somebody would have said, hang on, we've got to connect that with this dual occupancy. So the same thing, for instance, around communications. Who are the people, these so-called peaks and networks? These are people who are doing advocacy, and you want to align with those people. Where there's energy and they correspond with what we try to achieve, you want to align with them rather than reinvent. Some of these people, you've got CODA, I think it is, the Council of the Aging. They huge advocacy up to government, and so if we're trying to carry a package up to government in these spaces, we need to align. And so that's formed a useful backdrop. That's sort of really is where we got to. They're very nervous of too many projects. They're already out of the 7, think they'll sort of pick 3 to get on with, but they can only do what most people are doing all of this in addition to what they do. So it's a tough ask, but they felt good about, and the people who sort of actually wrote this stuff are actually linked into continuing with it. They kind of felt good about having sort of gone from that list and the whole sort of confusing big world down to sort of 7 things they think they can do. And that's where we got to. Excellent.
I like the focus on lifestyle discussion, not aging.
Yes, well there was quite a lot. You see, we put into communications and into this stuff, we put a lot around, some people talk about language, can we try and change perceptions?
Like talking about the elderly, nobody wants to think of themselves as being the elderly.
No.
It's a different word that you need to excite people to get involved, get engaged.
Yes. It should be something like the no longer stupid.
Vastly experienced.
Yeah, vastly experienced. I think seniors